So, hi, Kirstie. This is Kirstie Stewart of KSA Architects and Associates. She is based in Australia, so we have gone global. This is very, very welcome to our podcast. Kirstie, you're based in Western Australia, is that right? Is it Perth? Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, in sunny Western Australia. Yes.
Lovely sunny Perth. I don't want to hear about that. Thank you. It's absolutely freezing here, but look, it's really nice to meet you. Thank you for joining our podcast, and it'd be really nice for you to introduce yourself and the practice to our audience, and let everybody know about who you are, the business, and tell us a bit about you.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. It's fantastic to be here. We are an 8-year-old young, exciting architectural practice in Western Australia. We have obviously, I've got nearly 30 years experience in construction now, so we've been around in many ways before we even started. We have lots of experience. We have lots of experienced staff within our team, and there was a variety of different employers and backgrounds that we come from. And we bring a raft of on-site construction experience and design knowledge, and we like to think that we bring a different way of working together that is kind of a little bit unique and exciting, and that we have a really flexible working model and have a different way that we can interact with people in the cloud, in the internet, with the global environment, and we are really excited about that, so that can kind of give a different way of offering the idea of what team might mean to some people is a really exciting, flexible, young version of that's all cloud-based to us as a team. So yeah,
that's really, and of course, talking about the global reach and everything, obviously we've promoted one of your school projects, which looks wonderful, that you've done recently. Are you looking for expansion outside of initially Western Australia, across Australia, and then perhaps elsewhere in the world to get projects from around the world? Or
we'd love to do that. We do. We are commercial architects primarily. We do some residential work, but primarily commercial work across education, commercial sectors. And look, myself, I've grown up in Europe, emigrated from England at 13, and then did some architectural education in Germany with Daniel Liebskin and Kunsthochschule Weissensee, which is in Berlin. So I went back to study architecture in Berlin. So we do love Europe and the globe, which is sounding a little bit broad, but we've got American interests as well. But look, we have got a great desire to grow globally if we could, but we are 8 years into a exciting sort of modern vision of how we can practice architecture that's interested in how to express things locally and yet use global wisdom with how we can do that, and not be afraid to approach the way that we do things without the wisdom of consulting others in ways that we probably couldn't do, 5 or 10, even 20 years ago. You can. I think the world has become smaller, and thanks to COVID, I think that there are some good things that have come out of the COVID pandemic that have made that possible for everybody to look at that slightly differently.
I think so, yeah. And again, you're obviously gaining lots of exposure and traction. This one particular project of yours that we featured already, that we mentioned, St. Stephen's School, that's had a lot of local press exposure for you as well, hasn't it, already?
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is good.
Which is fantastic. And so we've looked at a global, not just globally, but then locally, how the flexible learning models can be kind of experimented with in the classroom, and how teachers can take students from outside to inside and then into different ways of collaborating outside and inside. And we appreciate that in the UK there might be colder areas outside, but we love science outside the walls of the classroom. So the walls of the classroom are not necessarily something that used to be, again, conventionally something that we sort of saw as a fixed, static sort of space. It's been an exciting project to sort of like explore different ways of engaging or bringing the outside to the inside and the inside to the outside. So we've got a really lovely outside area where you can teach undercover, but in the outside in the wind, and do experiments with all sorts of different ways of teaching. I don't know, simple experiments with flame or fire and things that you wouldn't be allowed to do inside the building, but that can kind of engage the kids in the outside environment.
That's really good. And so other projects then we talk about globally, but actually on the drawing board at the moment, what are you working on at the moment, and kind of what things are in the pipeline of any interest?
We are at the moment just wrapping up some exciting multi-campus master plans for a number of schools. We actually are looking at some large residential engagement in different developments of property, because at the moment Western Australia has actually been looking at a housing shortage. So that's something that if Western Australia needs to address sort of growing populations and growing immigration as well. So that's something that the state of Western Australia will be looking at quite soon.
Yeah.
Is just this pressing need of how to address that. So we're looking at some exciting projects there. We are also excited that we are into the Department of Finance, which is the local state government way of managing capital projects across the state, which include health, also potentially even into other areas of local government, which is really exciting for us. And hoping to that'll broaden us also deeper into education, but just into the public and private sector. So we've got some really exciting projects in that space that we're looking forward to.
How is one of the biggest things that pretty much every practice director I speak to here in the UK, the biggest stumbling block, or one of the largest stumbling blocks certainly, is the planning process. Is that so very different in Australia as well? Is that a huge barrier to you, or is it, with us sometimes it might take 18 months for somebody even to recognise your planning request, and then many months after that to push things through?
Well, interestingly, with having grown up in the UK myself, and then looked at Germany, and then in fact, when Western Australia's economy first was really depressed when I first came out of architecture school in the mid-90s, I went to Victoria on the east coast of Australia for nearly 10 years, which is where there's a lot more damp conditions climatically and different challenging soil conditions. Interestingly, in Victoria, they do have third-party objective rights, but I sometimes wonder if Western Australia could be seen as a little bit like Texas. We're on the west coast. We have no third-party objective rights in Western Australia, so that means that actually planning constraints here are dealt with by local government. They've got a lot of power, and it's quite unusual for things to take as long as 18 months over here. So planning constraints and planning matters are dealt with quite innovatively, actually, by West Australian government. And quite kind of more of a pro-development approach, which is a little bit more probably more of a capitalist approach, I suppose, from potentially a bigger picture perspective from the UK's perspective. Which is looking at the numbers, looking at housing. Gives, for example, the jurisdiction I actually live in the northern suburbs would be quite a large jurisdiction, and their commercial outlook of what's happening with housing shortages and things, they would be able to make quite reactive decisions that kind of can be seen quite quickly. And that's obviously a broad brush statement, but we've got bushfire planning in Australia is become a more problematic area, which is something that hopefully you never have to deal with in the UK.
I wouldn't have thought so. Flooding though, we have obviously big flooding problems, so I presume brings same sort of issues.
Yes, so the science building that we just built at St Stephen's School was actually in a flame zone, which is really difficult, almost if not impossible, to get approvals for projects in that kind of zoning. So we managed to navigate that as well as we could, but it didn't take 18 months to get a planning approval. No way. So even that was quite difficult, and off the top of my head, it was somewhere around 8-9 months, which is very long for Western Australia to be. That's a long time. But in Victoria, 18 months would not be unusual because of the days gone by when third-party people can object to a proposal, and then that can cause all sorts of trouble. And I think things are changing in Victoria now. But in England and UK, I know it's the age and the historical nature of a lot of the buildings that you're working with.
Absolutely, yes.
Presents a whole lot of different. I mean, historically in Western Australia, what they did, for example, in St George's Terrace, a lot of buildings were allowed to be knocked down, which wouldn't have been permitted in the UK.
No.
Which is arguably not a good thing, because some of the heritage hasn't been preserved here. So that means that you sometimes don't have that respect. But that has improved, but it probably isn't as well. I may get then criticised by somebody in heritage expertise. who deals with that, but I'm sure that the UK has a lot of better legislation potentially than we have over here, and knowledge with how to handle age and historical matters and things. There'd be more buildings on more historical registers in the UK than there
Yeah.
would here. So in fact, in some ways that can present a problem in Australia because we don't track enough data around looking at that. But,
I presume, I don't know this, but obviously the size and the expanse and the distance between cities and, you know, the territories in Australia, you know, I was there in the early 90s myself, and I just couldn't get my head around how, you know, to fly from, I was in Perth, to fly to Sydney, you know, it's like a 5-hour flight or whatever it was.
yeah,
It's huge
absolutely.
expanse. Is the architecture world heavily populated there? Do you have thousands of competitors? Is every neighbour of yours an architect as well, or is there you know, here in London alone, there's thousands of architects, you know, in a short geographical area? Is that the same with you guys?
It is, but it is still really competitive. It is still really competitive.
Yeah.
Like if you look at university numbers, I'm not sure. I remember when I was in the UK and then studying in Germany, I remember that Italy was actually producing really high numbers of students that weren't matching employment opportunities, which created a sort of unique problem, for example, in Italy. And I don't know if it's still like that, but in Australia, we had a little bit more measurement of that maybe when I graduated in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And now I would say we are getting, because of the university funding structure, probably a high number of graduates than potentially there were opportunities in the last few years. But that I don't know if that's sort of any indication of then. Yes, effectively it means there's a lot of competition.
Yeah.
But in some ways that's kind of exciting. In the regional areas, which we call the areas, it's just a word that, say, for example, government use for some of the areas where there's huge distances, that you do find specialists with people that do deal with those distances and large volume of property and different ways of approaching some of the lack of services and lack of infrastructure and the great distances that you have to approach with, say, different climatic control or erosion management or, you know, all sorts of different environmental conditions that might be quite different from what you'd be facing in a metropolitan area.
Yeah.
They may mean that there's less competitors in that area. But for example, we just actually did look at a project that was up north, and there's cyclone areas, for example. So that actually creates a really unique set of knowledge that you have to have around managing building in cyclone areas, distinct from other areas. So, for example, New Zealand has got a huge amount of, obviously, earthquake, which we don't get. We're not at such a high risk of in Western Australia, for example. So each of those climatic conditions brings specialties with them.
I mean, that's interesting alone from, you know, the other practices directors that I talk about here in the UK. It's fascinating just to hear your story and on behalf of the practice and the projects and all the different challenges that those bring from all the, you know, climatic issues that you've mentioned that we simply don't have here.
And even what I do find, interesting. Say, for example, bushfire is something that we get more. Everybody's knowledgeable about that because it's now become a pressing risk for everybody. Doesn't matter what area you're in, even in the city. So even in the metropolitan areas, that's something for sure. But for example, in the regional areas, there may only be 3 or 4 people that you're competing with, but they're really the only ones who can do the job. So and it takes a long time for them to become skilled at dealing with that kind of. I'm just pulling a number out of a hat there, by the way. But no, definitely.
So you're as practice director, then you're obviously are you looking to grow the team, or do you grow the team as new business comes in? Are you quite a reactive business? How would you kind of describe your model?
Well, we've actually worked with a really sort of unique way of looking at growing a business, because I started out originally 8 years ago as a mum thinking, well, maybe it'd be good to get some flexible working hours. I never anticipated we'd be as successful as we are. So,
that's really good.
So, and really had to stand on my own 2 feet and really support the business with wise infrastructure and grow it appropriately. So we had architectural business coaches who specialised in helping us grow the practice. And creating a vision for where we want to be, and then you build the practice according to the vision you draw. So
that's really good.
It's a kind of completely different way of looking at it, but we've got a lot of infrastructure and knowledge around that and how to do it appropriately. And in fact, they do a lot of work in the UK, interestingly enough. So a Scottish guy who's focused just on Archibiz, they're called. So they're really
Okay.
good. Ray's fantastic. So he ran his own business and now specialises in helping architects. And he certainly has a global vision and has actually got connections in UK and Scotland and England. So we really respect Ray's way of helping us build the business. So we've certainly had a vision where we definitely would love to grow, but we've tried to make sure that we manage that appropriately and carefully to grow slowly and not too fast, because if you get too many staff on who are too new at the same time, it can get a little bit unwieldy. So I'm sure
Absolutely.
Architects have other architects found the same thing?
Yeah, I mean that's the same in any business, I suppose, isn't it? If you take on too many staff and all your time and resources then spent training these staff to the way that you want to manage your business, it has to be a slow process with the building of any business, doesn't it? Really.
Absolutely. Yes.
If you become top heavy with new trainees that you need to teach the way of your working, then the wheels can come off very quickly, can't they? So
absolutely.
It sounds really good, and it's fascinating to learn about the different ways that you have to approach architecture and all the different environmental facets that come into your way of working that others just don't think about, and that alone makes for brilliant content for our listeners to hear about, and the way it works in Australia. And it's interesting to speak to somebody on the other side of the world and to hear about your practice and to share your work as well. Like I say, thank you for your most recent project you've sent across, and please do keep those coming, because we want to see more of your work and help raise your profile. And the Architecture Vogue magazine has now, thanks to you, and we're now in Dubai and India and across Europe, we're starting to see other practices from around the world join us and share their story as well. And as it grows and more practices join us from around the world, then it tends to kind of look after itself, doesn't it? It starts a snowball effect and grow, and other practice directors like yourself from anywhere in the world can share their story, and that's what it's all about, really.
No, it's really exciting. It's really exciting, and I think there's more and more validity or a good reason to be connecting with others in the world and learning from what other people are finding. And I'm certainly finding the longer and longer I'm in practice that the more and more we are now actually wanting to start to check in with other practices and actually, hey, what are you doing and how are you finding that is
absolutely
a good way of approaching it, and what's been a good experience for you. So thank you so much for
gone are the days of people keeping things to themselves, and I think that may be from COVID as well. Absolutely, I think it's brilliant that people share and are happy to share. There's enough work for everybody. I think people should genuinely help each other out and do what they can.
Definitely. I know that's what, Ray's actually also supported that too. So it's when we first started out a lot with Ray, and now we're looking at different ways of doing that. And also, at the moment, we're sort of trying to build on a number of things. One of them is how to improve the flexible model that we've got and connecting with other practices and business owners to see what's worked, what hasn't, in terms of building an HR structure that does really give you solidity and good future growth. So to make sure that the people that you have on board are obviously so important that they're happy as well. Yeah. So to us, that's a really important thing, as well as creating exciting buildings that offer modern places and spaces for people to be.
Well, I'm in awe of everything that you've done so far, and I'm following your journey, and it's brilliant. And first and foremost, obviously thank you for coming on. It's your late evening now, isn't it? So thank you for spending, although it's probably still daylight, isn't it, where you are now?
No, it is well into the evening. Yeah, it's like nearly 9 o'clock in the evening here. So
okay. Yes.
Yeah. Which is
well. I look forward to being able to put my shorts and flip-flops again, but it's probably going to be another 6 months until I do that. So fair play to you. I'm very envious. But thank you for telling us about your story and the practice and everything you've got going on. And I'll look forward to sharing this video with our audience in the next week or so.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. Really enjoy hearing more about what Architecture Vogue are doing across the world, across the globe. It's really fascinating.